Dorothy Heathcote was a drama teacher who emerged in the 60s and 70s. Now, she always said that she was interested in good education, first of all, rather than good drama, necessarily. Dorothy's method was very much about, wasn't really focused so much on performance work. It was about working together as a group, working together as a team, exploring human issues and human situations. She saw drama as a laboratory where we explore human behaviour and issues. She's best known today for a system of teaching which she called it Mantle of the Expert. The key Mantle elements are there is a fictional team, a fictional enterprise, and a fictional client and a commission, a big job that this team is asked to do. And it's a method of teaching across the curriculum and meeting teaching aims. So, for example, you might be, as a teacher, you might be teaching about ancient Egypt. And the children might be a team of people running a museum who are commissioned by a client to create an exhibition about the discovery of the tomb of Tutankhamun. As far as the students, the children are concerned, what they are doing is they're doing a drama, they're running a museum. But the teacher has his or her own teaching aims, and they set up the enterprise, the client, the commission, in order to meet their teaching aims. So the children will be learning a lot about ancient Egypt in running their company and creating an exhibition. And a Mantle project might last for half a term, it can be short, it can be longer. There are schools where a lot of the teaching is done through Mantle of the Expert, and I'm very pleased we have Lisa Hinton and Richard Kieran from Woodrow First School, where, as I say, a lot of the teaching is done through Mantle. And it's not, for me, it's not just a tool, it's a pedagogy. It's a system of teaching. It's a way of thinking about teaching and learning. And I often say to teachers, if you really take this on board, it will change you as a teacher. And I think it might be true to say that working on these projects has changed many of us in our way of teaching. So why did she develop this system called Mantle of the Expert? Her idea was that we need to get rid of what she called dummy runs in teaching. What does she mean by a dummy run? It's like a practice for the real thing. So we tell children, yes, you need to know this because one day you will need it. In the future, many years later, when you leave school, you'll need this. But in the real world, we don't learn like that. We learn things because we need them. So for our job, we might need to learn a foreign language, or we might decide we need to learn to drive, and we've got an immediate need for it. And a lot of teaching is in what Dorothy called over there time. What she meant by that was that we're talking about things that are happening in another time, in another place. Drama shifts that. So drama is talking in now time. Really, that's all that it is in essence. It's talking in now time. Instead of saying, what's this situation, let's learn about this situation that happened in the past, or let's hear about a situation that's happening in a different part of the world. It's now, it's here and now. We're talking about it now. We've got a problem now to deal with and to solve. And so she said, and so if people could forget the histrionic side of it, the theatrical side of it, and just see that, instead of working for future knowing, what you structure is a now problem. So it's happening now, or we're dealing with it now, which brings all your present knowing to create decisions that bring the future to you. So all drama is, it is now time learning. And of course the revolution in our schooling system would happen if instead of teaching mathematics, we taught children as if they were mathematicians and gave them present concrete mathematical problems to solve. If we could introduce it also that we are literary agents, or speaking as if we are. We are authors. We are mathematicians. We are historians. I think an enormous shift would happen. So, there's no pretense when you're working this way that the drama is real. But as Dorothy Heathcote herself said, the paradox is that this method of working through drama creates this sense of real purpose, of needing to know things now, needing to know them for the job that we are doing. Even though it's a fiction, people act and behave and are motivated as if it's real. They are developing knowledge and skills and applying it to the job that they need to do. There has to be a shift in the way that teachers work and the way that children work as well in the classroom. It's getting away from teacher dependency. Children tend to have a dependency on the teacher telling them what to do, an expectation that the teacher will tell them what to do, which can create a certain mindset in children of, okay, sitting back and thinking, go on then, teach me. Mantle of the expert is seen as a way of giving children power and responsibility and ownership and motivating them as well. I think if you're in a position of learning about something, you're always a student, and with all that goes with it in terms of passivity, you're always in the position of the one who does not know and needs to learn. The switch in Mantle of the expert is that the children are in a position of knowledge, authority, agency, learning about something as part of their job, to fulfill their job. This shifts knowledge itself to being something you work on, you work with, not just learn about. And that means the teacher has to change as well from being the one who's got all the answers, the one who knows, who controls the communication systems in the classroom. So in the classroom, traditionally, children do things for the teacher. And knowledge is traditionally seen as something to be taken in by the children. Heathcote, Dorothy, called this the transmission model of teaching. So I know, as a teacher, I know these things and I'm giving it to you, I'm transmitting it to you. I know, I tell you, you listen, you learn. And the dominant paradigm or model in this way of teaching, Dorothy called it the child as empty vessel. She stated, the philosophical basis of schools is still in that area of teach children about things and treat them as vessels or jugs or empty containers to be filled. And most courses for teachers are still about fill them up, in that the teaching methods fill people up. And some people get filled up to here, but they're never full. So when we're talking about drama in education, and indeed if we're talking about education, we have to decide, is this crucible or is this filling pots up? So crucible is like a bowl where you stir things round, like you might mix chemicals together in a crucible. So the alternative model for Dorothy was what she called the crucible model, crucible paradigm, where we're stirring our knowledge together. She said, now I am a crucible. I regard myself as one, and I believe children are crucibles. But this changes the world of the school. If tomorrow you walk into the classroom and you say, from this moment it is crucibles and not jugs, you're changing the world. And you're going to be changing it every second you decide crucible and not vessel. So as I said earlier, Dorothy saw drama as a kind of laboratory in which we explain the world to each other. So, in the laboratory, she said, we care about what we do. We get the information we require, and we share it all the time. That means we process it. We process it in talk, we process it in action, just like a laboratory outside the school works. So in the laboratory, instead of the transmission of knowledge, there's an emphasis on inquiry, exploration. She said, you never give people the total information, as a teacher that is. You give people the keys to enable their imagination to be freed, their power to influence, to operate, their understanding to have to come to it, to make sense of it. In other words, you turn the classroom into a laboratory where you stir things round together. So if you're using mantle, you have to decide it's crucibles and not jugs. The teacher's no longer the one who has all the knowledge, because you want the children to be active in pursuit of knowledge. And this client, this fictional client, becomes the external agent. So the children are doing it for their company, they're doing it for this client, rather than doing it for the teacher. You're learning things for a reason. You're learning things in a context. It demands a different kind of talk from teachers. You're trying to talk more as colleague with them, rather than teacher talk. It's a change from saying, as a teacher, standing there and saying, now what I want you to do is, to saying, well, I wonder what we should do about that then. When introduced to Dorothy's system, teachers sometimes object that they don't have time in their schedules for the kind of work that is required, as they have too much curriculum to cover. And that's certainly the case for teachers in England. They feel like they've got more and more information to give, more and more curriculum to cover. But this is based in the model of the child as an empty vessel that's going to be filled up more and more with knowledge. You have to keep filling them up. We've only got so much time, and we've got to keep filling them with more and more. So we haven't got time to do anything like mantle. The problem with that approach is that the knowledge, the information doesn't stay. It doesn't stick. It's like, as a teacher, you cover everything, but nothing sticks. It doesn't go into what Dorothy called deep memory. She said, now school seems to be about, let's get as much information as we can. But people don't hold it. How much of the information you spent hours getting in school do you use? How much do you even recall? In mantle, so you want them to find things out, you want them to use it, apply it, make the knowledge their own. And that is why it goes into deep memory. That is why they remember it years later. So mantle is this old-fashioned word that means kind of a cloak. So it's a strange word to use to call a system of education. But she said it's not a cloak by which a person is recognized. For her, it wasn't a garment. This is no garment to cover. I use it as a quality of leadership, carrying standards of behavior, morality, responsibility, ethics, and the spiritual basis of all action. So the mantle embodies the standards I ascribe to. It grows by usage, by use, not by stitching up a garment. The term expert is essential in the name because I value learning and curiosity to inquire. Schooling imposes such burdens of out-there information upon students that ways must be found to inspire and reward curious inquiry and give children the first steps towards pleasure in exploring new fields and shedding the insidious fear of error or making mistakes. Should it ever be seriously adopted as a system, our schooling would change. So for me, I think mantle is also a model of an ideal community. A major part of the teacher's time in the early phases of a mantle project is devoted to developing a sense of a shared culture, a sense of being citizens, members of a community. That is, to some extent, self-regulating and also stewards. They share in the responsibility for the work, and you're building a strong sense of ownership so that for them it becomes our company. We work together as a team. So here are some notes that she made, her justification for the use of Mantle of the Expert in an educational setting. All the work is based in doing things. Tasks are achieved. All the work is community-based. Each individual takes an equal share in the work, responsibility, achievements, as a participant in a group enterprise. Each individual works at a level of understanding relevant to themselves, reaching for and accepting challenges and demands as client and enterprise pressure is judiciously applied. The teacher leader has no supreme authority, no definitive answers. There's always reference to some other authority, the archives, memories, roles, and so on. This is necessary so that teacher dependency dies away. Questions, experiments, trial and error are positively supported, alternatives welcomed and explored. Tasks carry the learning and introduction of information. Publishing, there's always publishing at the end of it, by which she means public sharing. Publishing carries the reviewing, recognizing and realizing what children now know they know. The social nature of the work demands that all people constantly talk to each other about matters concerning the enterprise. This talk will range from conversation to giving lectures to each other and all kinds of talk between these two poles. It is the teacher's responsibility to see learning and teaching curriculum opportunities and inject them opportunely. All published work is displayed, filed, archived, exhibited as required by the enterprise. The space is never a classroom. It is where we run our enterprise. The enterprise is always selected by the teacher leader so that it can open up the learning and teaching opportunities the teacher deems most essential to fulfill, covering the curriculum. So, the commission model. In later years, Dorothy developed the commission model. In some ways, it's a development of Mantle of the Expert. But in this case, the client is real. The commission is real. It comes from an organization, perhaps, in the community. The idea is, it's about making children into active citizens. Because as Dorothy saw it, children have in many ways been disenfranchised in our society. We shut them away in schools, and then we say to them, when you leave, you will finally become a citizen. You'll finally become an active citizen in society, but we're keeping you separate from society for the time being. And Dorothy said, the worry for me is that the child laws were introduced, I think, in the 19th century, and it was to stop child labour. It was to stop children being exploited. The worry for me, she said, is that the child laws, in protecting children from the terrible circumstances of the 18th and 19th centuries, for example, the child laws have very effectively made children very ineffective. It's very hard for me to promise children, at the time they are children, an effective place in culture. I can do it in the classroom, but I find it very hard to fulfill the promise of the classroom in our culture. In many ways, we've built these walls between the world of school and the world of society outside, and I think commission model is partly about breaking down those walls. So she said, I have a dream that has not yet been realized. I would like students not to learn what their teachers teach them, but to be people who solve problems in the outside world that their teachers bring to them. The job of school head teachers, principals, should be to go out into the real world and find tasks. I dream of schools working with real tasks rather than learning about things in class. This is actually a radical way of learning. I want students to be citizens of the world. So commissions can take different forms. It could be a commission within a school or within a university. It could be one class, for example, in a school commissions another class to do something. But they can also be external organisations asking for help with a job of some sort. Again, you are building a community, a team. One thing that Dorothy stated, that in a commission model project, a teaching philosophy should be formulated as a mission statement. So her most famous project, the biggest project she did, was for a hospital garden. The design for a hospital garden that came from a hospital trust. So her own mission statement for that project was, all work undertaken shall be in the spirit of stewardship, not exploitation. This statement encapsulates economy, service, respect, detachment of scrutiny and observation, care for quality and fitness for purpose. That would be my baseline for the work of all the people for all their commission days. So again, there's this sense of a team with its standards, with its responsibility, an ideal community in many ways. In the commission model, we do not develop the skills of a professional architect or whatever the job might seem to entail. It's not about developing a professional skill set. Because in the Hexham Garden project, for example, actually designing a garden itself, producing the architectural plan, would be a skill beyond their abilities. And we're not about teaching them how to do that. What they did in that project with Dorothy was they investigated the meaning of gardens for people and how a garden, a new hospital garden, could serve people's needs. So the human need was always at the centre of it. These are Dorothy's notes on the project. On the face of it, this commission from the hospital involves the interested staff and students from the school in planning a garden, a pretty plot of land to be visited by those involved in contact with the hospital, either as workers, patients, visitors, or healers. I see it as much more than that. I see it as a very real and rich opportunity for the central garden idea to generate an enormous range of ideas and inventive work around the many facets of a public garden in a special place. It would involve a great range of study and expertise in the final publication and presentation to real people who must finance it. There are obvious areas to be studied: social science, climate, plants, the surrounding buildings, the seasons. How shall it be maintained so that it develops and flourishes? But there are many other developments to be considered. What are gardens for? What purposes shall be served? Who will use and benefit from it? So I see it as generating an enormous amount of work related with all the aspects of gardens in healing surroundings. And above all, an opportunity to cross curriculum boundaries and integrate knowledge. The most important aspects are a genuine purpose and use for all the school work, a requirement to follow through to final form of publication, a research practice and reflective process involving learning how to learn and realizing what is learned. She insisted, this is a teaching enterprise. It's not just providing a garden. It's realizing what we know because we provided a garden. So learning how to learn is one of the most important features. Because we're not just using the children, we're teaching, because that's what we are for. So the children investigated things like sunlight, photosynthesis. There was a need for immediate need for knowledge. They considered ideas for a memorial, but always with reference to this idea of a garden for the people. They explored the idea of a garden in imaginative ways, through drama, poetry, short stories. The commission model ends in a publication, public sharing. In Hexham, this took the form of presentations to the hospital trust. Really, they presented questions about the garden, how it might meet people's needs, rather than a final design as such. And I think this was the real outcome. They shared their learning, and that sort of consolidated it for them. The landscape architect for the garden was somebody called John Goodfellow, and he said that the final design drew heavily on the children's work and their ideas. So there's a difference with other models that you might find in higher education, where you have things like design thinking or capstone projects, because this is not, as I said, it's not an exercise in business training. There's very much an emphasis on what I call the projected clients. So in this case, it's not just the hospital trust that's the client. It's the citizens of Hexham. It's the people who will use this garden in years to come. So the focus is more exploratory than based in a kind of product at the end of it. I'd really like to see the commission model used in higher education, and we in fact used it here in the University of Lodz. Students at SAN made some notes on the differences between capstone projects that they had just done and the commission model. And they noted that one of the differences is in the commission model the focus is on teaching and learning, whereas in capstone projects it's on business problems. In the commission model it focuses on exploration, whereas capstone projects the focus is on developing the professional skill set. In the commission model it can be applied at different levels of education. Capstone projects are more about professionals working together for one client to provide a solution to their business problem. In the university here, there were English culture students who were commissioned by a museum in England, the Black Country Living Museum, to produce resources for Polish students, Polish children to learn about British culture. And at the moment we're working on a new project with SAN and with the University of Technology in Lodz, which is looking at how children with special needs, well, young people with special needs can be encouraged to come to universities. And here are some examples of projects that partners in the Erasmus Plus project have been doing.
I think that there is a significant difference, I think, between commission model and other models, like things to do with business and that sort of thing. And I think one of the things, I think it comes from what David said in that talk a little bit, about how, you know, the students are there for teaching and learning. They're not there to be used or to deliver something to somebody else. The idea of delivering it for someone else is a concept I have a bit of difficulty with. They need to engage with the person or persons who need their help. And I think the client in all this is a very significant thing to think about, because I think the client is the person or a team of people who require our help, which is very different from a client we have to deliver to, if that makes sense. Because what you're always doing, I think, as David says, you're sharing power in this pedagogy, so that in order for people to raise their status as students in a classroom, or special needs students, or any student children, they need to have their head raised taller, as Vygotsky would say, And in order for that to happen, they need to care about the client, and they need to engage with the client, and they need to feel that they can help the client. And that lifts them, if that makes sense. Does that make sense? So I think it's those sorts of things that you try to set up when you're setting a commission model. And I think with other programmes, they're already on the syllabus. We have to do a design thing for this, you know. So I think you are a bit constrained in that way, but I think there are always ways around it, of course, because you might be designing things for a particular group of people who are particularly needy and have certain difficulties to navigate. So I hope that makes some sense.
We are dealing with active learning and active teaching. So anything that puts people into movement and to create and to develop that skills together in teams, in groups, or as a community, you are also using different approaches combined with the commission model or the model of the experts. I think that I don't think you can really separate them, but if you stop and think, you can definitely find different practical approaches there, practical methodologies in it while you're developing the work. So it's a good combination. I think one adds to the other.
I think you are not combining methodologies. Think about to combine all the objectives and the ways of work of two methodologies.
Oh, yes.
You can working in one of them and you can use some ideas from the other one.
Yeah,
This
yeah.
it's nice.
Yeah.
But to be sure that you are doing both at the same time is not,
No, yeah,
for
yeah,
me
but-
it's not easy.
Yeah, that's what I mean when I said combination.
Yeah.
Oh,
And so I think sometimes if you try to work with one and then work with another, you might be actually working, they might seem like there's some similarities, but your end goals could be very different. So it might not be a good idea to combine them in that sense.
So it is possible to use different elements from different, perhaps, methodologies, but it has to be.
You have to know what you want as a
You
teacher.
have to, well, you have to get the goals first. Yes, so the goal is the key thing, and then you have to, work towards the goal.
I just think that, I mean, there is a danger of thinking this is a real client, so therefore everything we do is real. But I think, like, as an approach to teaching and learning, Dorothy always used what if, and the as if world, as she called it, when you'd create a fictional context and have people in role or whatever, because you always imagine what might it be like. And I remember watching the film about the garden project, and she had quite a number of real community members, friends of hers actually, who came in, and they were characters who were all, we imagine, they were all coming to visit the garden that they would have created. And they all talked about, they were all there, and I think we actually found out a little bit about what they were thinking as they arrived. And one guy saying, "Oh, I hope she's feeling better today." And he was referring to his wife, and other people having different thoughts. And they would be sitting around, and the task for the students, actually, in that fictionalized community that Dorothy created with friends coming in fact, was to find out, how can I interrupt somebody on their day-to-day living to find out what they are looking for when they come to the hospital, what would help them. So she thought, what if we create this likely community? Let's just see, and then we would approach them. How do we interrupt them? Do we interrupt them? And what kind of language do we use when we speak to them? Do we go up to them and say, "So what sort of things are you looking for in a garden or in a hospital garden?" No, we don't do that. We don't interrogate. We think of ways of capturing a conversation. We pay attention to them, and the paying attention to them is vital. So they watch them first. And they don't start asking questions that begin with what, where, why, who, because it is interrogatory. So it might even be about the weather. It might even be about, it's sometimes a long wait, isn't it, to find out how things are. It might be as simple as that. But that's just one example, and I could go on, and I won't. But it's one example of how you can use a drama in commission, because you're always imagining this world you're creating, which is the real world, but you have to have a dream of what it's going to be like. So we say, what if?
I posted something today on Facebook, which is a chart that Dorothy produced while she was working on the Hexham Hospital Garden Commission. And she said, 3 elements dominate in using dramatic elements. And she's here talking about the commission model. 1, the concept of changing frame, by which she means point of view. The window through which we decide to view. So as we're exploring a situation and issues, we can change the point of view. We can look at it from a different angle. We can choose to step aside from ourselves, our usual point of view, to look at it from a different point of view. How would certain people view this garden, for example? And 2, she calls the deliberate infusion of the other person, the other human being. Just as Yona was just talking about, the people who might come to this garden. It's putting those people at the centre of it, finding ways to put those people at the centre of it. And then she said conventions. She had 33, 34 dramatic conventions, theatrical conventions that she listed that could be used. And she talks about using conventions in commission model to keep the human face, by which she means it's always about the human being, exploring and understanding the human being, the human need. So that's, I think, where drama comes into it. It becomes that kind of element across the whole thing. Drama as a laboratory, we're exploring human behaviour.